Hello, and welcome back to the Audible Finish, a weekly show discussing the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasi. We have a jam-packed schedule to go through in this week's episode, including our reviews of both WWE's Payback and AEW's All Out events. We will also look into the weekly television shows from both companies, including but not limited to Gunther solidifying his place as the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion in WWE history, and CM Punk's shock firing in AEW. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. We're going to start off this week with WWE's programming. If you would like to hear our thoughts first on what happened in AEW, please feel free to jump ahead using the time chapters in the description of the video. On that note, Thanasi, take us away with a brief look at SmackDown before we give our review of Payback.
Well, let's just go through the SmackDown results very quickly. So we opened up with a John Cena promo along with Jimmy Uso. Jimmy said that he doesn't want Jey Uso to be corrupted like Roman and John Cena, who just take. Cena then catches the super kick. He hits an AA or FU as we know it. Same old Cena. He has his babyface pop at the expense of an up-and-coming heel. Next up, Santos Escobar and Rey Mysterio take on Austin Theory and Grayson Waller. Grayson gets the pin on Santos after the rolling stunner. Bobby Lashley and the Street Profits cut a promo, and the three of them say that they are coming for power, control, and gold. Then the undisputed tag champs KO and Sami Zayn defeat the LWO following a pop-up powerbomb, haluva kick, and stunner. The Miz and LA Knight have a promo hyping up their match. Knight says that he paid his dues while The Miz came in through reality TV. Miz says that Knight is like the crowd with all the setbacks, and he is just going to have a chance to succeed. Next up, Bayley and Shotzi Blackheart take each other on. Shotzi hits the DDT variation following Charlotte's interference to get the victory over the former Women's World Champion. And the main event of the night, Solo versus AJ Styles. Jay interferes on the phenomenal forearm to set up Solo for the Samoan spike and the victory. Solo then goes to spike Jay, but he falls, or rather Paul E tells him not to. Jay hits a super kick. Jimmy hits a super kick and a splash on AJ Styles, lifts his finger into the air as Paul talks onto his phone as we go off the air.
On that note, Thanasi, let's dive straight into Payback. And the opening contest we have is Becky Lynch versus Trish Stratus in a steel cage match. Thanasi, do you want to take us through this?
Well, that's for me. Yes, very happy to. So Becky Lynch, as you said, takes on the 7-time women's champion Trish Stratus. Some of the highlights of this match: Trish rebounds Becky off of the steel cage and hits a Widow's Peak. Becky then counters with a Twist of Fate. These are both moves of these are callbacks to Lita versus Victoria, who had the main event steel cage match on Monday Night Raw. We also see Trish Stratus hitting an Avalanche Bulldog for a 2.99 count. And also in the match, when Trish literally has her legs over the top of the steel cage, Becky wrenches her back over by trapping the legs into the bars, pulls her through, and delivers a superplex from the top of the cage for a very, very weak kick out. Becky then grabs the legs of Trish Stratus as she's trying to escape via the door, while Zoe Stark actually pulls on the other side, so we get a bit of tug-of-war action. Stark smacks the door into Becky's face and then enters the cage to break up the pin after the manhandle slam. At this point, Becky Lynch shuts the door, similar to Undertaker in Hell in a Cell against CM Punk in 2009. And then Becky manhandle slams Stark, hits an avalanche manhandle slam on the 7-time world champion, and covers her for the 1, 2, 3. She even signs an autograph on the way back up the ramp. And then we get a nice moment at the end. After copying a sour slap from Trish Stratus, Stark hits the Z360 or Z360 to leave on her own terms. And it seems like this is the end of the Trish Stratus run.
It seems so. And Thanasi, we've had our thoughts on this overall rivalry between Trish Stratus and Becky Lynch. For my money, this was a perfect conclusion. And actually, it really ended the whole rivalry, which for me had been a bit lackluster, but it ended it on a really high note. Is that what it was like for you as well?
I think that's exactly right. When we say they just hit the ground running, they put them out on a great card. They gave them the time that it deserved. If we'd had this match at SummerSlam, I think that would have been the perfect ending to have it there. But they basically brought the rivalry to an appropriate end.
Yes, and I think it's worth mentioning that the rivalry had felt lackluster, but the moment they actually gave them main event spots and opening spots, the chance to actually end the night or start it off hotly, they actually stepped up to the plate. So there is some value in actually putting those sorts of feuds at the beginning or at the end and really setting the tone or finishing the show. This takes us now into the LA Knight versus The Miz contest. And before it started, John Cena came out and said that he wanted to be the special guest referee for the match. This was much to the Miz's frustration, but John Cena managed to get one up on him, and he did indeed referee this contest. This saw LA Knight come out on top over The Miz. Very noticeably, there was a point where The Miz actually tried to go for the five-knuckle shuffle, taunting John Cena in the process, but LA Knight actually got up, hit a power slam, and he followed it up with his elbow drop and blunt force trauma for the win. So LA Knight goes over on The Miz on this one. Thanasi, was this the right call?
It definitely was the right call. I think at the end of the day, we even got a nice segment, at the top of the ramp, the endorsement of Cena with LA Knight. Look, I think I would have preferred it a little bit more without Cena there to give LA Knight the proper focus that he deserves. But yes, the booking to put LA Knight over, it was the right call.
Next up, we have Rey Mysterio versus Austin Theory for the United States Championship. Thanasi, do you want to take us through what happened here?
Of course. So some of the highlights from this match, Austin Theory, he delivers a clothesline, a springboard stomp, and a suplex in quick succession, while saying nothing about it. Saying nothing about it. He's actually able to match the lucha pace of Rey Mysterio, and he swings the champ around while holding a rear chin lock. Theory then tries to pull the mask off to insult the lucha heritage. Rey is able to deliver the moonsault, the running Hurricane Rana, and a reverse baseball slide into a tornado DDT on the outside. Theory holds the champion in the reverse fireman's carry, kind of like a torture rack, and spins out into a spin-out powerbomb. That was a very, very nice move from him. And as we get to the finish, Rey successfully hits the 619 on Theory, but Theory catches the West Coast pop to transition the fireman's carry for an 8-count down. Mysterio, however, gets his legs spun around to roll through for a sneaky cover, which proves to be the difference maker. Mysterio retains this in this match. Look, they did very well to have a nice mid-card contest, but nothing especially interesting coming out of this match, I would say.
This now leads into the Sami Zayn, Kevin Owens Judgment Day Steel City Street fight for the undisputed WWE Tag Team Championships. Before we get into the summary of it, just want to say this match, we've said it in last week's episode as well about fitting tributes to Terry Funk. This was the tribute to Terry Funk. We've got to give a special shout out to Kevin Owens here, who not only bled, but bled profusely. The match featured lots of violence, lots of weaponry, kendo sticks, chairs, tables. The match's tone started off with Sami Zayn diving to the outside on top of Damian Priest and Finn Balor. Garbage cans got introduced into the match. Owens even ripped off his Kevin Owens shirt to reveal a Terry Funk shirt. So if there was ever any doubt that he was doing a tribute to Terry Funk, I think that right there showed it completely. He put a garbage can on Balor, and Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn actually hit Balor with kendo sticks while he had the garbage can over him. And then a table was set up on the outside, and this led to a later spot. But at this point, Damian Priest managed to regain control for his team. The fight managed to move into the crowd, and Dominic Mysterio got involved at this stage. And it was near this point that Owens started to draw blood. They both the Judgment Day both managed to knock Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn over an area in the crowd, and as they're taunting and celebrating their success, Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens come out in Pittsburgh Penguins hockey attire and start hitting them with hockey sticks. Now, just as a small reprieve, just to elaborate, Thanasi, you and I aren't hockey fans, so obviously this doesn't really land for us. I think that's fair to say, isn't it?
It is true that it doesn't land for us. However, I did have a small observation that I did mention to you over the weekend. The way that they kind of emerged over the top, wearing new attire, it did remind me of the scene from The Wizard of Oz where the male protagonists attack the guards, the villainous guards, put on their gear and then slowly, like lift their heads over the corner as if to, all right, now we have to turn our evil on. So it made me chuckle at least.
I have to say, we're probably the only podcast out there that manages to combine Wizard of Oz with WWE.
Subscribe.
To get back to the action, Zayn hits Finn Balor with a Blue Thunder Bomb onto a stack of chairs, but Finn Balor managed to kick out at 2. Then 4 chairs were set up, and Priest actually suplexes Zayn onto them. And Owens breaks up the pin at this stage by throwing a chair at Damian Priest. Back in the crowd, they go into the kickoff area. Zayn takes out Priest and Balor with a somersault off the kickoff panel's table. And then Mysterio re-enters the scene at this point, but Owens brawls with him, sets him up on a table, and swanton dives off the staircase onto Mysterio, a la Jeff Hardy from Survivor Series 2002. Now the action goes back into the ring, and Priest throws a garbage can at Zayn's head, and this leads to a 2 count. Zayn hits Balor to send him through the table on the outside. There's a stunner and a haluva kick hit on Priest, but at this point, JD McDonough intervenes and breaks up the pin. Owens pop-up powerbombs McDonough onto the announce table, and then this is when Rhea Ripley enters the scene and spears Owens through the barricade. Finn Balor manages to recover, hits Sling Blade drop kick into the corner on Zayn, and then rolls, and just as he goes for the coup de grace, Zayn manages to roll away. Zayn hits his exploder suplex into the corner and then lands a haluva kick on Balor, but Mysterio intervenes once more, hits Zayn with the Money in the Bank briefcase, and Balor pins Zayn for the win. So Judgment Day, and I think it's fair to say the entire Judgment Day really got the win here for them over our babyface heroes, and we have new tag team champs. And I say, what did you make of all this chaos?
Well, it was a real team effort on the part of the Judgment Day. Everyone got involved. Even Mummy came out and hit that massive spear through the barricade. But I think one of my big observations as soon as I saw the finish is that Finn Balor has now completed his Triple Crown. And correct me if I'm wrong, has he also been United States champion?
I believe he has.
Well, that means, as he mentioned on Raw, he is indeed a Grand Slam champion. So good for Finn. And I think he's one of the first people to actually be using the Universal title, solely the Universal title, albeit for a day that he held it, to actually complete that Triple Crown. So good for him.
Very much so. So, Thanasi, do you want to take us through what happened next on Payback?
Yes. So before we get to the Women's World title match, let me just make a brief mention of the fact that there was a talk show segment. Grayson Waller hosted Cody Rhodes on the Grayson Waller Effect. And there's enormous news here. Jey Uso is on the Monday Night Raw roster. So they'll be playing host to main event Jey Uso. Let's move on though to the Women's World title match. So strength and power is very much the story with these girls, with these women rather. The two very, very strong wrestlers in the women's division, lots of shoulder tackles and clothesline attempts to outpower the opponent. Raquel mounts a comeback during the match with a fall-away slam and a splash to the corner. She follows that up with a delayed vertical suplex and the spinning corkscrew elbow. Rhea targets the injured knee and locks in the inverted standing sharpshooter that she has. The knee was weakened when Rhea actually shifted her weight to counter the powerbomb attempt by Raquel. And then towards the end of the match, Raquel taps into the aggression with a powerbomb lift, but it's a spine attack actually onto the turnbuckle, followed by a lawn dart into the post as well. And then in the finish of the match, it's only, of course, when Dom Dom comes to Mummy's rescue that Rhea actually manages to regain control. She hits Riptide and successfully retains clean. However, in spite of losing, Raquel did look very good in this match. Rhea did look like the dominant heel. She did very, very well for herself, but she managed to keep up very well with her babyface. So they did manage to dance very well together. Credit to both of them.
And the biggest news item coming out of this is that after this match, Judgment Day officially is holding all the gold with the exception of the World Heavyweight Championship. So they are doing very well. And as they mentioned later on Raw, they truly are the dominant faction now in WWE. It's no longer the Bloodline. This leads into our main event for Payback, and that was Seth Rollins versus Shinsuke Nakamura for the World Heavyweight Championship. A quick shout out to the Great Muta, who was actually in attendance for this match, and this was a landmark for Shinsuke Nakamura, wherein this was his first main event of a pay-per-view since joining WWE. So, to go into it, Nakamura actually throws Rollins onto the announce table spine first, and then he follows it up by throwing him into the barricade, again, spine first. So this is leading into that story that we knew was being set up, which is that he's going to target his Rollins' injured back. Rollins delivers a Hurricane Rana on Nakamura from the top rope, and he follows it up with a frog splash, but Nakamura kicks out at 2. Nakamura managed to avoid the stomp, and then hit a flying knee off the top rope onto Rollins for a near 4. Then he follows it up with a snap German suplex on Rollins for another 2. And then there is an inverted exploder suplex. He sets up for the Kinshasa, but Rollins manages to counter it into a super kick, and this is for another 2 count. Nakamura manages to lock in a triangle choke on Rollins, but Rollins manages to muster the strength to lift him up despite the pain on his back and powerbomb him down, and he gets this for a near 4. Nakamura then hits Rollins with a move off the top rope, and he follows it up with Kinshasa to the neck. And then Rollins manages to counter, and then he follows it up with a pedigree. And then he goes again for the stomp, but it gets intercepted. Shinsuke tries to get momentum, but he gets landed down, and Rollins goes again for the stomp, this time successfully, and he manages to just crawl away from Payback with his World Heavyweight Championship still in his hands. And that's it. This was a good story, and I think and it's also post-match, it's worth noting Shinsuke actually attacked Rollins, so this isn't the end of their little feud. But how did you feel about this first encounter between the two?
Look, overall, you put Seth Rollins and Shinsuke Nakamura in the main event of a pay-per-view, given the world title, they are going to deliver for you. And they did deliver for us. We had a great match. I particularly liked Nakamura locking in the single leg Boston Crab in that particular spot. We know that in Japan that it's very difficult to break out of that move, and that it puts a lot of pressure on the back. I think they've done very well to manufacture the story here, because yes, they could have gone, Seth Rollins, Nakamura, NXT days, both did very well as NXT champions. However, the idea of creating the injury storyline and that Nakamura is going to attack mind, body, and soul of Seth Rollins, I think it was put together very well. I was not falling for 1 second, though. I didn't at any point think that Nakamura was going to win the belt. In spite of many people on the internet actually thinking that with the way they were presenting it, it did look like it was going to be a title change. But
Myself
nevertheless,
included.
It's true. But I think seeing Seth with the resilience, with the powerbomb counter to the triangle submission, where it was able to lift him up and then smack him back down, even though we did see the strength of Nakamura as well. In all, I was very satisfied with this main event.
Well, with the result going in Rollins' favor, you managed to actually equalize in the predictions. So we were 4-all, and luckily for us, we had another pay-per-view that can decide that result, but we'll get to that a bit later. Let's now head over to Raw. So a quick rundown of what happened on this week's Raw. The show started with Jey Uso and Sami Zayn coming out, with Sami saying he's proud of Jey for managing to break out of the clutches of the bloodline, and the two have a hug. This is followed up immediately by Drew McIntyre and Matt Riddle both coming out, and both of them eyed up Jey as they were walking out. So clearly the bad blood has not been resolved yet between Jey and all of the competitors he interfered with or attacked during his time in the bloodline. So this Drew McIntyre and Matt Riddle actually coming out for a tornado tag team match, and that was between themselves and the Viking Raiders, which the Viking Raiders actually managed to win after accidental interference by Kofi on Matt Riddle. Seth Rollins offered Nakamura a rematch for the World Heavyweight Championship for that night, but Nakamura said no. The two had a brawl and they needed to be separated by officials. Afterwards, Shinsuke wrestled Ricochet, who had also come out to Seth's aid along with the officials, and he causes a DQ finish after hitting Ricochet with a steel chair. The Judgment Day celebrate their success at Payback, and JD McDonough comes out giving Priest a brand new customized Senior Money in the Bank briefcase. Shayna Baszler defeats Zoe Stark by knockout with the Karafuda clutch, and this was followed up by Raquel Rodriguez beating Chelsea Green. Rodriguez announced after the match that she will face Rhea Ripley next week on Raw in a rematch, and that Dominic Mysterio has been barred from ringside. The Miz hosts Miz TV with an absent or invisible John Cena. He then challenges LA Knight to another match. Adam Pearce then announces backstage to Jey Uso that there's been a request for compensation, which means that we're going to get a Raw trade to SmackDown to replace Jey Uso. So there's some speculation going on as to who that might be. Potentially an American Nightmare. Who knows? JD McDonough then rolls up Sami Zayn to defeat him, and he had help from Dominic Mysterio, and this is playing into the storyline now, JD McDonough potentially joining the ranks of the Judgment Day. Our main event saw Gunther beat Chad Gable to retain his Intercontinental Championship, and this confirms his place as the longest reigning Intercontinental Champion of all time. Thanasi, how did Raw sit with you?
I want to raise two things. One, massive props to Gunther on this enormous record. We've been waiting many, many years for this to be broken. My first memories of someone trying to break the record were actually Night of Champions 2007, I think it was. Vengeance Night of Champions, when Santino Marella was making references to it, or at least around that time. However, this is a massive milestone. He's going to have the record for many years to come, and it's well-deserved. If I can also just call out The Miz fighting an invisible Cena, like playing the stunt double. Fantastic work from the bloke. I love The Miz's work. He's very reliable, an excellent sports entertainer overall.
Yeah, and I think something worth noting was on commentary, they kind of alluded that The Miz was kind of losing his mind. And initially that was my thought as well, and I was thinking, oh, this is a bit ridiculous. But he managed to ground it in reality, where he acknowledged that, no, Cena isn't there. He knows that. But the point still remains that there are people out there that are going against him and that have impeded him from proving that he is the best, and in this particular instance, better than LA Knight. So I appreciated that little add-on in that segment. Let's now go and discuss what happened with AEW. So before we get into All Out, we're going to do a quick recap of what occurred on Collision. Thanasi, would you like to do the honors?
Well, I'm very happy to do the honors because Collision opened up with an enormous bang. Usually Dynamite is the explosive show, but this time we had a big Collision. TK, Tony Khan, announces the sacking of one CM Punk. So there's a pre-recorded segment that is aired at the top of the show. We then see Ricky Starks. He signs on for a strap match against the Dragon, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. Psych. It's actually the American Dragon, Bryan Danielson, who is back. Opening contest of the night, Danny Garcia, Daddy Magic, and Cool Hand Ange, the Real Deal, a spin-off group of the Jericho Appreciation Society, fall to the Acclaimed and Daddy Ass in a trios match following the catch and release, elbow drop, and Fame Asa. Aussie Open take on Nick Wayne and Commander. The heels win after a Coriolis. We then get just a very brief promo segment with Wayne, Darby, and Christian and Luchasaurus hyping their all-out contest. Dennis Rodman has a segment with Jeff Jarrett, Satnam Singh, Sanjay Dutt, and Karen Jarrett. During this, the Acclaimed emerge, and it sets up a titles match on the pre-show of All Out. Later on, the Outcasts take on Britt Baker, Hikaru Shida, and Chris Statlander, the homegrowns. Ruby rolls up Britt after the spray can use by Saraya. Next contest, Powerhouse Hobbs squashes a jobber, but then brawls briefly with Miro. And finally, in the main event of the match, we get Dax Harwood versus Jay White, with Jay White getting the win after a Blade Runner. The brawl between BC Gold and the two babyface teams, Young Bucks and FTR, is the epilogue that brings us to the end, because the Young Bucks have actually made a special appearance on Collision. Wouldn't you know it? That's Collision.
Yes, and look, I do have some thoughts on this. Firstly, I just want to address the biggest elephant in the room, which is CM Punk's firing. Can I say, I think we know very well our thoughts on Punk, which is that we very much are CM Punk guys. So naturally, in this case, it's hard to not be biased and err towards his side of things. To try be neutral, I think in the grand scheme of things, a separation between the two parties involved is probably the right call. But I have to say, there are things in Tony Khan's statement, which, by the way, he actually addressed the Chicago crowd himself live with this message, and so props to him for actually putting himself out in the lion's den. But there were things in his statement that I truly think were either hyperbole or just outright lies, and this is my pure just speculation on this part. We have no actual information behind what happened as of yet, so we may be completely wrong, or in this case I might be completely wrong. But when he says that he felt his life was in danger, I have to call suspect on that, because Punk didn't lay a single finger on Tony Khan. I could understand if he said that his talents' lives were in danger when Punk attacked the Young Bucks, or in this case, defending himself against the Young Bucks back last year at All Out, or when he choked out Jungle Boy, Jack Perry, this time in All In. And I can understand if he says the talent felt their lives were in danger, because realistically, they're getting violently attacked by a fellow wrestler. But when he says his life was in danger, I have to call some sort of suspicion on that, because that doesn't ring true to me. And to me, it sounds very much like a person who has never been involved in a physical altercation in his life to actually say that just being lunged at, which is the report in this case, is constitutes having your life in danger. I don't know. What did you think of that statement overall?
Look, I think specifically with that statement, I try as much as possible to think of these things objectively. And to be quite honest with you, in principle, the things that Tony Khan was saying, that an individual should have the right to feel safe at work, the individual should have the right to be safe at work. These are things that are 100% true. Anytime someone violates that, action needs to be taken immediately. Now, stepping back then towards the specific comment itself, that he thought his life was in danger, I struggle to understand exactly what could have been happening in that moment. We've seen the reports where that Punk lunged at Tony Khan. We don't actually have the full story coming out of that. But I think at the end of the day, we just need to make a blanket statement that this kind of behavior is absolutely inappropriate in the workplace, because I think sometimes we do forget as fans that because combat is part of this medium of entertainment, that this is only on screen. The second you begin to act unprofessionally backstage, consequences must follow. And the most objective that I can be here, because I am a massive CM Punk fan, I love all the work that he's done on screen. He is the common denominator in all of this. We could also be, it's very harsh to say, but incident after incident after incident, the sacking had to come at some point. And eventually, yes, he has been moved to the alumni section of shopaew.com, indicating that yes, he is gone for sure. It's not just kayfabe. It's disappointing to see. Even though he did go out with a bang, it's been a massive 2 years. We've had a lot of great content with him. I'm interested to see what ends up of CM Punk, but there's so much more that we could be saying about this. In fact, let us know in the comments if you're interested in us doing something special on the CM Punk saga.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to add one more point, which is that there have been lots of comments talking about how Punk is the common denominator in all of this, and it's certainly in the last year or so, there's plenty to suggest that is the case. But when Andrade and Sammy Guevara are getting in fights, when Eddie Kingston is getting into fights with Sammy Guevara, when there's been reports, suggestions that the women's roster is a closed book and that it's a clique formation type deal. I'm not saying any of these, like some of these are speculation, some of these are just comments, but I think, to be honest, for me, the common denominator in all this is the mismanagement from the AEW officials. And that has to start with the top, which is Tony Khan. Now, I hope that in making a statement, and a bold statement in actually firing CM Punk, that this is the beginning of Tony Khan trying to get some control and actually starting to show that there is a boss and there is a hierarchy at play, and there is conduct that needs to be followed.
And if I could just say this, as far as I'm aware, Jack Perry is still suspended. That is 110% the right call. The bloke went into business for himself, even spoke towards the camera in order to go into business for himself. Actions have consequences, and unprofessional actions should have consequences. So it's definitely the right call to keep him suspended as well.
And I think it's to me, it's no coincidence that the very first Collision episode that CM Punk is fired is also the first episode that features the Young Bucks. I don't think that was an accident. But we digress. There's plenty we could say on it, but let's just move on, because we actually had a great pay-per-view coming out the day after this, and that was All Out. So, Thanasi, do you want to... Let's discuss All Out, shall we?
Let's do so.
Okay. Well, to start off with, I'm just going to go through what happened in the Ring of Honor matches that opened the show. So MJF and Adam Cole managed to successfully defend their ROH World Tag Team Championships against the Dark Order. This was in spite of MJF copying some blows to his neck and at one point having touch and go to the back. But he did eventually come back out and helped Adam Cole as they both hit the double clothesline on Alex Reynolds for the win. And in the match after that was Samoa Joe successfully defending his World Television Championship against Shane Taylor. But I think we're both in agreement here that the most interesting thing that happened in this time period was actually when Joe walked out for his match and he actually shoved MJF, and this led to a brawl between the two competitors. Joe even managed to lock him into a guillotine choke, and they had to be separated by security and officials. But it seems like Samoa Joe has his eyes set on the world champion.
Well, he was looking at the real world's champion about a week ago, and one can only logically say that he's got a taste for gold. And if I can just point this out as well, I loved this detail. The way that it all started off, it wasn't just a mere shove. It was a shove in the same vein that Samoa Joe did, I think it was around 2015-16 when he was NXT champion, walking through the back, and MJF was playing an extra, was playing a security guard on NXT television. And he was walking in front of Joe as they were walking backstage, and Joe immediately slams him aside as if to say, no one walks ahead of the champion. If I can make another pop culture reference, it's like in Robin Hood, when the snake lifts its head above the king, or the usurping king, Prince John, and he gets pulled down. It's like no one sits higher than the king. No one walks ahead of the king of television.
Another timely cultural reference for all our listeners out there.
Thank you.
Let's now go into the next match of the night, which was Luchasaurus versus Darby Allin for the TNT Championship. Noticeably, Darby Allin came out with tape around his midsection, and to start off with, Luchasaurus actually chucked Darby Allin into the barricade and swung him onto the steel steps. Sorry, not onto, into the steel steps, so even more vicious. Darby Allin actually got busted open at this point, and then he got dropped face first on top of the steel steps. And then the steel steps were then dropped onto Darby's injured back, with Luchasaurus then walking on top of them to put extra weight on Darby Allin's injured back. At this point, Luchasaurus ripped off the tape around Darby's midsection and even used it to try and put more pressure in a choke on Darby Allin. And at this point, Darby Allin managed to get some control back, so he somersaulted onto Luchasaurus, who was sat on a steel chair on the outside. Christian offered a towel for Nick Wayne to throw in, but at this point, Darby dived onto Christian. Darby performed an avalanche code red from the top rope for a near fall. Then Christian hit Nick Wayne, who was on the outside, with a chair set up for a concerto, and this was enough to make Darby Allin hesitate on the coffin drop, and Luchasaurus took advantage of this, hitting 2 tombstone pile drivers, throwing him headfirst onto the turnbuckle, and then giving him 1 lariat to the back for the win. Afterwards, Christian Cage teased doing concerto onto Darby Allin, but various members of the AEW locker room came out to make the save. But the key thing coming out of this is that Christian Cage and Luchasaurus are still the TNT champions. Thanasi, what did you think of this?
Well, I think the part that kind of made me stand aside from the fact that Luchasaurus was outstanding in this match, right? As a wrestler, he was very, very on fire. But I really liked how the AEW locker room were the ones to make the save before Christian Cage was going to deliver concerto to the fallen challenger. It's that endorsement from the locker room. He's one of us. We're going to stand there to protect him. I thought that was a real interesting moment. And I think it's almost portraying Darby as a locker room leader of sorts. And I like seeing that side of him.
I think, and to add on to that, I think the other thing that it does is that it really makes Christian and Luchasaurus look like the top heels of the company. And the thing is, with MJF currently in his honeymoon phase, if that makes sense, with Adam Cole, it's up to guys like Christian Cage, Luchasaurus, and Samoa Joe to actually hold up the mantle as the top heels of the company. And I think they're doing that very well. I think Christian is probably on par with maybe Don Callis as just the most hated person in AEW. So yeah, it's good to see that carryover, and personally, I'm glad to see they are still the TNT champion. Nancy, do you want to take us through the next contest, which was Powerhouse Will Hobbs versus Miro?
Well, if I can just preface this by saying, I don't usually like these kind of big man matches, right? I enjoy the small wrestlers. I enjoy the fast-paced style, the super indie style of NXT Black and Gold. However, this match was brilliant. In the early goings, the boys exchange running crossbodies against the ropes before having a strike-off with clotheslines. Miro, in fact, he borrows from his friend Sheamus's book with the chest beating on the apron and follows it up with a superplex on Powerhouse Will Hobbs. After some more meat exchanges, Miro gets his Machka kick and locks in the camel clutch. Does he call it the redemption or the redeemer maneuver, I think it's called? After which Hobbs powers out to an elevated position, not easy when you've got Miro on your back, and then delivers the spine buster, the patented spine buster. And if I can just make the point here, the crowd were on fire with this match, chanting meat, meat, meat. It reminded me, if I can make yet another pop culture reference, of the Smurfs, where they replaced every second word with Smurf. The crowd were replacing every second word with meat in their chants. Miro becomes incensed, however, when Hobbs tries to apply the camel clutch, to the point that he also steals the finisher with the patented spine buster. And then he applies the game over camel clutch, and Hobbs quits. Hobbs submits to the submission. I was very surprised to see this, but massive finish to what is a very strong match. Hobbs then attacks Miro after the handshake moment. I thought it would have been awesome to get a real handshake moment here, but that's the way that Hobbs worked us. It actually prompts the debut of the hot and flexible CJ Perry, who uses the chair on Hobbs to save her husband. The Redeemer, however, he looks conflicted as he exits the ring. because he looked at her very confused and says, "You're not real. You're not real." So I'm not quite sure where they're going to take this story. It was surprising, but overall, I'm a massive, massive fan of this match. I thought that they did very, very well to sell the whole strongman versus strongman vibe.
Yeah, I completely agree. I found the match enthralling, and I mentioned this to you in private, but I think the thing I found is this was probably the one match in across both pay-per-views where it actually started it actually finished, sorry, even stronger than it started in terms of the crowd reaction. I think the fans actually found themselves getting even more interested and motivated to see the end. And I think that's something in wrestling that we shouldn't be dismissive of the ability to actually make the crowd join you emotionally and actually end it in a crescendo fitting the emotional turmoil. So I found that in all, just my favorite part of the match is the way it actually got everyone lifted. Let's now go into the Chris Statlander Ruby Soho contest for the TBS Championship. Thanasi, do you want to take us through this one as well?
Let me take us through this one. So in the early going, Statlander performs a corkscrew fishhook falcon arrow, and then locks in the gory special, a la Gory Guerrero. The champ also hits an awesome avalanche power slam for a near fall. And then as we proceed through the match, Ruby actually spins around back first for a tornado DDT and quickly smacks a Hurricane Rana out of the flip. Ruby also hits a no future, rather a eat defeat like no future move, followed by Destination Unknown. This one was again for a near fall, a 2.5. But the finish of this match actually sees Tony Storm confiscate the spray can from Ruby's clutches as Saraya is distracting the referee. And that sets up Chris Statlander's Wednesday Night Fever. Well, All Out took place on a Saturday, so it's Saturday Night Fever, the pile driver. She retains the belt. She is still the women's television champion.
Should correct you, Fancy. It was a Sunday. Saturday was Payback. So in your hypothetical, it's Sunday Night Fever.
Well, the commentary team did say Saturday Night Fever, so I think that is the default name of the move.
Yeah. Let's now go into the next match, which was Bryan Danielson versus Ricky Starks in a no disqualification strap match. So before we talk about the action, I just want to quickly make a reference that Bryan Danielson came out to the final countdown. This was the same theme that he used in Ring of Honor and the same theme he came out to as a special for the Forbidden Door pay-per-view earlier this year. And perhaps I was looking at this a bit pessimistically, but I got the impression that this was Tony Khan trying to get in the fans' good graces after the controversy surrounding Punk. Nevertheless, let's get back into it. Ricky Steamboat was actually on commentary for this match, which was excellent. And Starks attacked Danielson before getting the strap on his hand. He hit Danielson with his weight belt and actually managed to bust him open using the buckle. And at this point, he agrees to have the strap put on and the match officially starts. He stomps on Danielson's head on the steel steps, but Danielson starts whipping Starks with the strap and choking him out while his leg is trapped in the corner. Danielson dragged Ricky Starks repeatedly into the ring post, busting Starks open in the process. And at this point, Ricky was managed to get momentum back in his side, started whipping Danielson repeatedly, but out of nowhere, the American Dragon absorbed this series of whips with the strap, and he gets Stark down with his yes kicks. At this point, Big Bill interfered, but Ricky the Dragon Steamboat stopped Big Bill in his tracks, and Danielson managed to send Ricky Starks over the top rope onto Big Bill, and he followed this up with his own dive onto the two heels. At this point, Starks intercepted Danielson's flying knee with a spear for a 2 count, and this was followed up with another flying knee from Danielson, this time successfully landing it on Ricky Starks for a near fall. At this point, Danielson started to kick his effing head in and gets him into the label lock, He then transitions it into a chokehold using the strap, and at this point, Ricky Starks faded away, knocked out, and the referee used the arm tap method, which I'll get into a little bit later. But Bryan Danielson's victorious in his AEW return. What did you think of the match?
I think we'll give a lot of props to Ricky Starks in this match, and Bryan Danielson did say it in the media conference at the end. Ricky Starks actually carried Danielson through this match, so perhaps that means that he's not quite fully back at 100%. But I think in all, it's an understandable decision to bring him back in the absence of CM Punk, more star power. Like we get it, like we get the logic behind this. And if I can just point out the final countdown, the crowd singing was so loud for the chorus. It was amazing to listen to that. So all in all, a real feel-good match. And of course, who doesn't love having Ricky Steamboat around? The guy looks phenomenal for his age.
I will say, just as a quick mention, because it was used here, I'm not a fan in wrestling of what seems to be just a choice of the officials as to which method they're going to use to check a knockout. As we know in wrestling, there is the popular arm put down, and you check it. If it drops 3 times, you call the knockout. But if they manage to keep it up at any point, the match goes on. But they've started to use this MMA style thing, where you just tap it and see if the arm responds. And frankly, if you're going to use one of these methods, I'm on board with it. But the fact they use both, it kind of pisses me off. Because it's like, well, how do you decide which one is more appropriate in these scenarios? And personally, I love the theatricality of the dropping the arm 3 times. And I think that if you actually had some matches finish that way with the third drop, because nowadays we kind of just expect the arm to tense up at the 2. Whereas if we actually did see it drop a couple times, I think that would be more engaging, and it would help make that whole process a little bit easier to actually embrace and actually fall into the spectacle of, oh, is he going to get knocked out here or what? So just personally, I'm not a fan of what seems to be trivial nature of which method they decide. But I digress. Let's now move on as to what happened. And at this stage, Nigel McGuinness actually announced that Hangman Page, who was victorious in the Over the Budget Battle Royal, which was which had a 50K donation on the line for the charity of choice of the victor. And Nigel Guinness announced that Page had chosen to donate his winnings to the Chicago Public Education Fund, which I thought was a nice moment, and I'm glad to see such an initiative actually take place with a big wrestling company.
Yeah, I think both of us having done both primary and secondary education in public education, it was a great sign to see this from Hangman.
The next match we had following this was Eddie Kingston and Katsuyori Shibata versus the Blackpool Combat Club in the form of Claudio Castagnoli and Wheeler Yuta. We're not going to go into this in too much depth, but the thing to note is that Castagnoli actually got the win with a European uppercut on Kingston, having collapsed on him afterwards to get the win. So Castagnoli, he manages to win a match with his European uppercut, which is quite bizarre, and I think even the commentators were quite shocked at this point.
I think it is bizarre when it's always very easy for him. I think he's used the pop-up European uppercut before as a finisher. I think that's a lot more visually satisfying, a lot more visually engaging. But yes, it was a surprise because he basically won with a strike. It's something that Big Show used to do with a weapon of mass destruction. So he's up there. Strength levels is really, really strong.
Well, this takes us into what was arguably the most anticipated match of All Out, and that was Kenny Omega versus Konosuke Takeshita. So, Thanasi, do you want to take us through this match?
Time for me to take it away. I want to give this match the attention that it deserves. So let's begin from the beginning. So on the outside, Kenny actually hit the fireman's carry senton and moonsault off of the barricade. So we had some nice outside action. Takeshita responded with a brainbuster on the outside area. And as if that's not enough, he hits a springboard senton after Callis lays chairs on top of Kenny's injured midsection. Of course, because the referee was inside the ring, he didn't see the illegal use of weapons. In an homage to Sami Zayn, Takeshita also hits a haluva kick and a blue thunder bomb because his first opponent was El Generico, as Excalibur explains to us. That was a very interesting fact that I was not aware of. Kenny then gets the knees up to counter the diving senton and hits a tope suicida near the announce table, delivers a missile drop kick to the back of the neck, his Snapdragon suplex, the V-trigger, the reverse Rana. He's on fire. Takeshita hits a stiff clothesline in a Hail Mary, but Kenny pushes on with a powerbomb and V-trigger combo. Takeshita, however, does successfully reverse the one-winged angel into his modified tombstone pile driver and then delivers a deadlift German suplex. Towards the end of the match, Omega looks for the electric chair in the corner, looking as if he's going to hit the one-winged angel off the top rope, but Takeshita transitions into an avalanche blue thunder bomb, and in the finish of the match, the referee disarms Takeshita of the screwdriver, but he still reverses the one-winged angel into a German and V-trigger for 2. And then with some words of motivation, Takeshita's difference maker, after having stolen his opponent's offense, is to deliver the naked knee-running Wagamama knee strike, I think he calls it, and that gets us to the 1, 2, and 3. I think big argument to name this match of the night. I think we were actually anticipating this to be the main event, and how can you argue with the showing that we got? Dimitri, what did you think?
For me, this was the best match of the night, and an excellent showing between the two in what I am assuming is going to be the first of a couple bouts between the two competitors. But at least for the time being, it seems like Takeshita's got one up on Kenny Omega, so I'm very impressed here, and I thought that he performed very well, and I think it's important that they stepped up because in a match that was kind of bare of some like main event level matches through not just with the absence of CM Punk, but with the absence of MJF in singles competition for his world championship, it was important that some of these other matches stepped up, and this was certainly the one that did step up the most for me. Well, this takes us now into the next match, which was Bullet Club Gold versus FTR and the Young Bucks. Thanasi, do you want to quickly tell us about what happened here?
Of course, there's an argument to be made that this was either the semi-main or the P-break match that separated the main from the semi-main, but nevertheless, 8-man tag action. We do get a standoff spot, as we were expecting, with quadruple atomic drops and sharpshooters from the baby faces, but then the heels isolate Dax Harwood, and the Bucks manage to get in a hot tag to deliver a bulldog and dropkick combo and a flurry of super kicks. Then Matt and Cash, so mixing up the tag action here, Matt and Dash also hit some super kicks, and Matt also assists Dax in the pile driver attempt. We get a big spot with a Dax superplex on Colt Gunn, followed by a Cash Wheeler diving splash, a Matt Jackson elbow drop, and a Nick Jackson 450 splash that would have been the finish of the match without Juice breaking up the pin. He also breaks up the Shatter Machine attempt, which means Nick Jackson actually subs in to help Dax pull it off. There's a skirmish at the end of the match to finish up, which goes as follows. FTR look for the Shatter Machine. Juice pushes Cash out of the way, leaving him vulnerable to eat a Blade Runner. Austin Gunn then pushes Dax out of the ring and covers the fallen Cash for the 1, 2, 3. The heels emerge victorious here. The Bang Bang Gang is on top.
And for my money, that was the one thing that saved this match, which is a shame because they're all talented performers. But personally, I didn't find the substitutions in for the tag team finishing moves that clever. And I felt like it was a bit corny, and it kind of took away a bit of the value of the match because it kind of felt like they're doing it a bit too gimmicky for my liking. So personally, I wasn't a big fan of this match, but I think there's an argument to be made that, like you said, maybe this was just in my mind the P break between the matches, the Kenny Omega Takeshita, and then what would happen in the main event. But I think And it's unfortunate, but because FTR are so close with Punk, that you couldn't help but feel in this match that there's outside thoughts in your mind rather than what's happening in the ring. For the people in attendance, I don't think that was the case. And I think it helps add this point that there was some concerns Chicago might hijack All Out, but I think this match showed that AEW has its own fan base that is able to combat the CM Punk loyalists, and it's able to step in and make sure that there isn't that concern, and we don't get those moments like in WWE in years past where Chicago would just hijack the show with CM Punk chants.
Yeah, I think when you've got just the one, essentially a monopoly with WWE in years past, fans had nowhere else to go. So when you're going to go to the wrestling show, basically the only choice, if you want to hijack the show, you're going to. Whereas now in these kinds of cases, it's kind of like, the episode of The Simpsons where Lisa feels replaced by Allison and she daydreams about being at a concert with all number 2 level musicians. And she wakes up from the dream and says, why would they come to the concert just to boo us? So it's like, why would you go to AEW just to boo the show? I think that's the way that I'm thinking about it. So overall, I'm actually very happy that Chicago did not hijack the show.
This now leads us into the main event of the night, which was Orange Cassidy versus Jon Moxley for the AEW International Championship. Some notable highlights to go through. Firstly, Orange Cassidy was busted open quite early into the match, and Jon Moxley actually hit a pile driver on him for a 2. This was followed by a diving DDT and then followed up by a regulation DDT by Cassidy and an orange punch. But as we know, his right arm has been attacked immensely in the last couple months, so the severity of the move isn't as bad, and Moxley managed to kick out at 2 here. Moxley followed it up with another pile driver for another near fall, and then locks in a bulldog choke, which Cassidy managed to get out of. Moxley then removes the protective padding on the outside and tries to pile drive Cassidy on the exposed concrete, but Cassidy manages to counter this into a beach break maneuver. He drop kicks Moxley's head into the steel steps, and then he hits 2 orange punches on Moxley. He goes for a third one, but Moxley manages to counter this into a cutter. He attempts a paradigm shift, but this gets reversed into another orange punch and a spear for a 2. At this point, Moxley hits his Death Rider finisher, but Cassidy kicks out at 2. And then Orange Cassidy, the ever-defiant champion, gives Jon Moxley 2 middle fingers in defiance. And Moxley then follows this up with another Death Rider, and this gives him the 1, 2, 3. We have a new AEW International Champion. So, how did you feel about this contest as the closing match of the night?
Look, I think we can say they did very well, right? As a wrestling match, this was a very worthy main event. I wonder to myself, to what extent is it appropriate to be having mid-card titles as the main event of pay-per-views? I think in some instances it is all right to do it, but overall, I think the goal here was to help elevate Orange Cassidy as absolute main event talent, and he stepped up. He did really well. Great babyface moment. Great wrestling all round. And of course, Mox is very reliable as a heel. Like, he was just fantastic with some of his heel work, some of his expressions. I was a big fan of this match overall. And I liked the sympathetic look where Orange was absolutely dripping blood onto the canvas as he got up to flip off Mox. I thought that was an excellent visual.
Well, I hate to put a dampening on the positivity here, but Orange Cassidy kicked out of 2 pile drivers. An already injured Orange Cassidy, who was busted open, kicked out of 2 pile drivers. What is the point of using that maneuver in wrestling if you can cop it twice and get out of it? And then likewise, I know that his orange punch has been his hand has been injured, but he hits like 3, 4, 5 of them in this match. So and the thing is, when he hits them, we didn't get the impression that his hand is injured after every one, and that's why he hesitated, wasn't able to get the pin or anything. It's like, no, like the argument is his hand was compromised. But if that's the case, then show that he's in pain every time he hits it anyway. So I was very conflicted in this match because I did enjoy it, and I thought there were good moments in it. But just overall, from the psychology standpoint of it, and I'm not a wrestling expert, but I understand that if you're going to pile drive someone, drive someone's skull into the mat, don't do it multiple times in the same match and then just have them kick out, because then it compromises the value of actually getting your head attacked so violently. But yes, but all credit to Cassidy, because I did think that he stepped up in this main event, and he did have a very lengthy run as the AEW International Champion, and he defended it, I think, 31 times. So that's not to be scoffed at all. All in all, the All Out predictions, I actually came out on top on this one, Tennessee, 8-4. So I think, and I had a look at it, I think what came in my favor is last week with All In, you were backing the baby faces, and that was a babyface dominant card. And I think this week we saw that the heels were the ones that actually came out on top for the most part. So I think that came into my favor this time around. But overall predictions, I came out on top 12-8. We have a new champion amongst the two of us. But
Good for you.
But with many pay-per-views in store in the future, I think it's fair to say that there's no security when it comes to predictions champion amongst us two.
Yes, I'll be taking that metaphorical strap back soon.
Well, the big final question, and I don't want to dwell on it too long because both were worthy pay-per-views, but did one sit with you better than the other?
Look, to be honest with you, my reflection, part of it is structural, and I think that's where I give the edge to Payback. I like the idea of like a 6 or 7 match card that you can compress ideally into 3 hours. I think that's the perfect duration for your main roster pay-per-view. I'm not a big fan of these longer 4-hour pay-per-views. They're just massive festivals, especially when we already got 4 hours plus last week. But yeah, I think contrary to my usual approach, yes, I think Payback was a better pay-per-view.
Well, I agree as well, but I will preface it by completely agreeing with your point that it was more so structurally the case. I think both put out great matches, and I think literally the one thing in Payback's favor is that with less matches, you've concentrated on those a bit more. Whereas with All Out, I think especially having had a pay-per-view the week before, it was just great wrestling, but some of it was just, you're going through the motions, and like they had to divide and conquer, and they had a lot to make up for as well, I think, with all the controversy as well. So they stepped up to the plate, but with the structure and with the calm that WWE's Payback had, I think they were just on top. But both were excellent. We're going to finish this week's edition of the Audible Finish with just a quick recap of what happened on Dynamite. So Dynamite opened with Orange Cassidy delivering a promo in the ring, and essentially he said that, I'm going to show up every week no matter what, whether I'm champion or not champion. So a good fighting hard babyface, which is excellent for the company. Jon Moxley then beat AR Fox to retain his AEW International Championship, so his first successful defense. And backstage, Christian Cage taunted Nick Wayne a little and offered his services as a real mentor for him instead of Darby Allin. And this was building up anticipation for the main event, which was Nick Wayne versus Darby Allin. Chris Statlander beat Emi Sakura in the TBS Championship Open Challenge. And this was followed up by Chris Jericho and Sammy Guevara defeating Aussie Open, with some tension amongst the two Le Sex gods after the match. Don Callis revealed that next week he will reveal his and Takeshita's next target. And this was followed up with a MJF Samoa Joe promo exchange, a very tense promo exchange, with both sharing some good verbal barbs. And the two actually fought afterwards, with MJF coming out worse with his injury to his neck getting aggravated. And it's very clear, if there was any doubt after All Out, I think it's very clear who MJF's next serious target is going to be. Roderick Strong beat Trent Beretta in their first round match in the Grand Slam World Title Eliminator Tournament. And then Hangman Adam Page had an in-ring interview with Tony Schiavone that got quickly interrupted by Swerve Strickland, who spit some harsh realities to Page. And then this followed up with Brian Cage actually taking Page out following the promo segment. In the main event, Darby Allin wrestled Nick Wayne in the other first round match of the World Title Eliminator Tournament on this show. Mid-match, Christian Cage and Luchasaurus came out and joined the commentary desk. And then at the end, Darby Allin actually made Nick Wayne give up. So a very tense situation developing between those two right there and then. And that was Dynamite. And I see any quick thoughts on that?
Look, I think if we had more time, I'd want to give more attention to the MJF promo with Samoa Joe. I think they were both fantastic. I kind of was reminded a little bit of when we saw the first confrontation between Punk and MJF. I think it was around Thanksgiving time 2021 in the US. I just got those kinds of vibes that it's like a real big microphone to microphone moment. Would have liked to have hyped it up a little bit, but it's always a treat when you get those two on the microphone together.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in for this jam-packed episode of the Audible Finish. And until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.